Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is the RuneQuest starter set for RuneQuest Glorantha by Chaosium. Okay, first a bit of history. Released in 2021, the RuneQuest starter set is an item that has been created to introduce new players to the world of Glorantha and the RuneQuest rules. It is available as this box set and in PDF. And unfortunately, that is where the information I was able to find out on its background stopped. I found myself unable to find out anything else on the conception and creation of the starter set. Luckily, I was able to reach out to one of the designers and authors, Jason Doral, who was happy to provide the information I was looking for. Quoting him directly, he had this to say. After the phenomenal success of the Call of Cthulhu starter set, Chaosium's owners and I sat in a booth at Essen Spiel and came up with a plan to do one for RuneQuest. We decided that it would have the following characteristics. Number 1, flat out be the best starter set we were capable of delivering. Number 2, be useful for long time and new players, with new and never before seen content. 3, up the ante for the Call of Cthulhu one, with full colour art, maps, etc. I was passionate that it not be a fire and forget product with no utility for long time fans. It needed to be a perfect introduction to the world and the system. I collected a lot of different game starter sets, took a lot of notes, played most of them, and made a clear list of what our core goals were and what the final deliverable would look like. It was in development for about 2.5 years, all told, and all the scenarios were play tested multiple times by different groups and at different events. We did other stuff simultaneously, to be sure. We discussed character creation rules, but scrapped them early. RuneQuest character creation is an involved, immersive process that produces well-rounded adventurers who are embedded into their cultures, with robust personal histories, are members of cults and with familial, clan and tribal associations and loyalties. That's a selling point for the game, but it's the opposite of quick and easy to get into. So we decided on pre-generated characters and threw in 7 additional pre-generated characters beyond the iconic 7 we used in the RuneQuest Quick Start and the core rulebook. So players get 14 pre-gen to some variety of play experience. One of the adventures was commissioned for the box and I wrote another one. The first one was, despite being a lot of fun to play, just too weird for a first impression of Glorantha, and unfortunately relied on a bit of background knowledge of what's normal and what's unusual in the setting. The second, my own, was, I think, solid, but had some role-playing challenges that might not be good for first-timers, some improvisational role-playing. They both worked as normal adventures and thus will go into another product. We ended up with 3 adventures, 2 mid-length ones and 1 big one, as well as many story seeds that can be played through with the materials in the box with little effort. The solo quest was probably the most last-minute addition to the project, and we brought in 2 experienced Twine developers on the team whose goal was to develop something that would be great as a turn-the-page-to-entry-X type adventure, but also a thing we could put on the website as a free, interactive adventure to learn the rules. So with that in mind, let's continue to the cover. Here we have a quite excellent piece by Ossi Hiakala. I admire the fact that at least some fantasy tropes have been ignored here by having the adventurers fight a crashed kid, a creature that is uniquely Gloranthan. Okay, to the inside. There'll be some mild spoilers going forward, so stop watching now if you intend to play this. The first thing we are greeted with is a read me first, which tells you what's in the box. Interestingly, it also tells you what's not in the box, that being rules for character creation, equipment, advanced combat options, rune masters, sorcery and advanced spirit world knowledge, sacred time, and campaign-oriented material. However, this is all available in the RuneQuest Glorantha main book. If we flip the sheet over, we have a further advertisement for other RuneQuest products. There is what has to be said a decent set of dice jammed in the top, similar to the Call of Cthulhu starter set, and though I think Chaosium missed a trick by not putting in a set of RuneQuest-specific dice. This is followed by the 62-page Book 1, Rules, the 62-page Book 2, The World of Glorantha, the 58-page Book 3, Solo Quest, and the 82-page Book 4, Adventures. All of these books are magazine-like. It's worth mentioning that if you put the backs of the 4 books together as so, then you have another map. There's also 14 pre-generated characters and 2 blank ones. This is followed by a map of Northern Sartar, which has a map of Johnstown on the back, and also a map of the Rainbow Mounds, which has a player facing one on one side and a GM's one on the back, which is a poor decision considering the GM may need to use both at the same time. There's a gatefold reference sheet which covers ability results, the runes, the resistance table, augmentation, hit locations, common rune magic, attack and parry results, and dodge results. We also have a sheet with Glorantha runes in their 4 types: elements, powers, forms, and conditions. There's a fairly handy stiff card strike rank tracker with a breakdown of how they work and the modifiers. And this has a further advertisement for Chaosium on the back. A great start. Okay, so firstly, let's take a look at Book 1, Rules. Opening it up, it's good to see a particularly nice dedication to the late Greg Stafford, where it's acknowledged that without him, nobody would be playing in Glorantha. Once we get past the contents page, we get the introduction to Glorantha. Here it explains that adventurers are members of society and have duties and loyalties that are often deep-rooted. It points out that the peoples of the world are tied to the runes, cosmic powers that define Glorantha, and are manifested by the gods. As members of cults dedicated to the smorgasbord of deities here, adventurers progress and strengthen their connection to the runes, gaining power and questing towards becoming true heroes. Glorantha is a place where heroic deeds are reflected in the hero world, a mythic realm. Mythology on Glorantha is very real, and everybody knows it. It's a world abundant in magic and magical beings, and heroes fight for their family, companions, and gods in order to achieve the greatness needed to resist the coming wave of chaos that are prophesied to end the world. We also have the additional box out here that gives us a brief history of Glorantha and RuneQuest, pointing out that it was originally created in 1966 by the late Greg Stafford and published in 1975 as the setting of the board game White Bear Red Moon by a burgeoning company called the Chaosium. Its deep and rich background helped it become the setting for 1978's RuneQuest First Edition, which was primarily written by the late Steve Perrin. The setting has been around for over 50 years, spawning hundreds of works based on it. It then goes into rules of play. It covers the usual things like the role of the game master and players and has a little discussion on the dice used, basically all of them, and then goes into the game system. There are 7 stats in RuneQuest, those being strength, con, size, dex, int, power and charisma, and from these attributes there are a number of derived characteristics, things like hit point, strike rank, damage bonus and the like. It moves on from there to abilities, the most common method of action resolution in RuneQuest. These are represented in skills, runes and passions and help determine your chance of success, as well as touching on ability experience checks. It also mentions the reputation score, the measure of how well known your adventurer's renown is. It goes into characteristic rolls. This is usually what is required in lieu of an ability skill roll, and is the characteristic times 5, with each used to resolve certain things. For example, if an adventurer wanted to barge a door open, they would need a strength times 5 roll. This is followed by a small example of play, and then we have the ability results table, which demonstrates ability scores from 01 to 122 and higher, and includes the number needed on a D100 for a critical roll, special roll, successful roll, failed roll, and fumbled roll. Critical results are calculated as 1/20th of the modified chance of success at something with varying effects. Weapons ignore armour, climbing distances further, you get the idea. Special results are calculated as 1/5 of the modified chance of success, and it is better than a normal success, but not as good as a critical success. A normal success is, well, a normal success, and a failure is just that, and a fumble is a particularly bad attempt at doing something, and is 1/20th of the chance of failure, and usually results in a disastrous consequence. After this, we move on to opposed resolution. This is when one ability is put up against an opponent's ability, and this is followed by the resistance table, whereby characteristics are pitted against one another. There's always an active and a passive characteristic, for example, strength versus size to knock somebody over. After this, it goes into augmenting abilities using runes or passions. More on those in a bit. A critical roll when augmenting adds 50% of the roll you're trying to augment. A special adds 30%. A success adds 20%. A fail means a minus 20%, with a failed passion giving a minus 10% to all rolls during a scene. And a failed rune roll meaning minus 20% of the rune until they spend a day meditating on it. A fumble means a huge minus 50% of the roll intended. A passion fumble has the adventurer racked with despair, and they can only run, dodge, hide or flee for the rest of the scene. Whereas for a rune, they become alienated from it and cannot use it until they spend a day meditating on it. And to either of those, they immediately lose D10% from it. It actually gives the best explanation I've seen so far for abilities over 100% and how they are implemented in game. Essentially, if a skill is over 100%, let's say for the sake of argument 125%, then the 25% of the ability above 100 comes off the ability being used, but also the ability being used against it. So for example, if someone had a dagger at 125% and attacked in combat, they would deduct 25% from their score, and anyone either parrying or dodging would take 25% chance of their chance of succeeding. If two people have scores over 100%, then the difference is the deduction. There's a box out called Our Cousin Cthulhu, where it touches upon the similarities in the system used for the games. They both use derivatives of Chaosium's basic role-playing system, also pointing out that there are no luck points in RuneQuest. It touches on re-attempting ability rolls and then goes into time and movement. The metric system is used in RuneQuest, and a character's move score breaks down into 1 point of move equals 3 meters, provided they are unencumbered and not in combat. Moving beyond their normal move score adds to their strike rank. More on that in a bit. It briefly mentions travel time and then goes straight into skills. All characters have a basic chance of doing something, plus a modifier based on related characteristics. Making a successful check entitles a player to put a tick next to that box, as there is a chance at a later date that the ability could increase. It lists all of the agility skills, which are pretty much as expected, and then goes into communication skills, which again are pretty much par for the course. We have a box out on lore skills where it discusses the specificity of some of the skills and the fact that they don't improve via experience, only through training. And this is followed by a second one regarding languages, where it talks about the most common languages as well as those spoken exclusively by various regions and creatures. The knowledge skills are where we begin to see the flavour of Glorantha, with the likes of cult lore, customs, homeland lore, managed household and peaceful cut, which is used as a method of respectful butchery to free the spirits of the animal. We also have the magic skills, which has things such as prepare corpse, which is unrelated to necromancy, and is used to demonstrate the proper ceremonial way of laying out and issuing final rites, traditions and spells to do with burial. There is sense assassin, a skill taught exclusively to worshippers of Humact that allows them to spot the telltale signs of an intended murder. We have sense chaos, a skill taught exclusively to worshippers of Stormbull so that they can spot chaos's taint upon the world. Spirit combat, which is used to fight hostile spirits. Spirit dance, which is used to avoid hostile spirits by shamans, and the super specific understand herd beast, which is used by herders to read the signals made by herded animals. Manipulation skills are pretty much what you'd expect, as are the perception skills, which also has the skill insight, which is different depending on your own species or other ones. The stealth skills are limited to hide and move quietly. Weapon skills are covered more broadly in that section. It then talks about experience and skill times and then moves on to passions. Passions are the likes of loyalty, love, hatred and honour that elevate adventurers into the stuff of legends. It lists all of the most common passions and then talks about how they are used to augment a skill roll. They can go up and down during play, and any that hit 0 are removed entirely. Additionally, adventurers can gain new passions through the course of play. We then move on to the name of the game, runes. They are intrinsic to the nature of Glorantha and define the world and the gods, suffusing everything and everyone. It describes them as the building blocks of Glorantha, and they define the cosmos, being symbols of latent power that can be found everywhere. There are 4 types of runes: elements, powers, forms, and conditions, though the latter are not discussed within the scope of the starter set. Each rune has a different set of associations, things like skills, creatures, weapons, and the like, and adventurers have affinities to particular runes. The higher the percentage, the more strongly influenced they are. Power runes are diametrically opposed to one another, for example, harmony and disorder, and the percentage in each rune has to be perfectly balanced on the opposite side. Similarly, form runes are unique to sentient beings and paired into opposites. It then lists all of the runes other than the condition runes, along with their type, associations, gods associated with them, and opposites. Runes are used to cast rune magic, more on that in a bit, and to augment skills as detailed earlier. As universal archetypes, runes influence those who are strongly affiliated with them and can clash with passions at times. This box out talks about how occasionally mandatory rune and passion rolls will be required. Runes can be used to gain a strong idea of what an adventurer would do in a given situation. After this, we move on to combat. Combat is performed in a melee round, which is made up of 12 strike ranks, or SR. All creatures have a base SR based on their size and dex, and this is modified by a number of factors, things such as weapon type, magic points spent, surprise and the like. It recommends that the GM should use a d12 to count up the SRs, beginning at 1 and ending the round at 12. We have a table of various SR modifiers, and it also talks how magic is dealt with using SRs. There's a box out titled Surviving Combat, where it points out that combat in RuneQuest is deadly and never entered into lightly, listing a number of things that can be done to ensure survivability is at a premium. It touches on missile weapon SRs and then makes the point that any combination of actions in a round that takes more than 12 SRs to complete overflow into the next round. So for example, if an action would take 15 SRs to do, it would happen on SR3 the following round. It goes into the basics of attacking and parrying, and gives us a table as per the handout mentioned earlier. It talks about dodging, disengaging from melee, range, the difference in damage between a special and a critical, hit locations, armour, and the results of damage. Many left legs were damaged in the making of this book. We then move on to the abundance of healing magic in Glorantha, and also character death. It covers the difference between healing magic, first aid and natural healing, and then we have a double-page spread of the contained adventurer sheet, where it details every section and what it's for. This is followed by a 2-page example of combat, which is actually pretty good, and then we move on to magic. It again stresses that Glorantha is an extremely magical world, and that most intelligent creatures can use it, stating that the most common magic is battle or spirit magic. Rune magic is the power of the gods, and it even touches upon the esoteric manipulation of the runes, that is sorcery. It gives the basics of casting a spell, boosting a spell, the resistance roll, and the different methods of increasing the chance of casting, things like meditation and rituals that are detailed in this table here. We go into spell matrices, i.e. magic items that allow a user to cast a specific spell, and then it goes into spirit magic. It talks about magic focuses, magic points, resistance rolls, and spell SRs, and then moves on to a fairly decent selection of spirit magic spells. After this, it goes on to the power of the gods, rune magic. Initiates of the various cults on Glorantha can invoke the power of their deity and channel magic from the runes. They always manifest the deity somehow in doing so, whether that be physically resembling them or lightning crackling from their fingertips or the like, and the more that is cast, the more the deity manifests. Rune points are gained by the sacrifice of power points to their god, and once the spells have been cast, they need to be replenished before they can be used again through cult rites or worship on holy days. On these days, the adventurer needs to partake in the rite and then roll their worship skill, which can be augmented with magic points, to gain an amount of their rune magic back depending on the day they perform the rites. Rune spells can obviously only be used if the caster has enough rune points, and they need to roll against their affinity for that rune. These spells always go off on SR1 of a round. Success means the spell takes effect and the rune points are spent. A critical means it takes effect and no rune points are spent. On a fumble, it fails and the points are lost anyway. Also, casting a rune magic spell prevents the caster from using other rune magic and spirit magic spells that round, other than illusion or extension spells, which are cast at the same time. Rune spells can be stacked if it's in their description, i.e. multiple rune spells can be cast at once in a single round on SR1. It goes on to talk about common rune spells and the characteristics of them, and this is followed by a massive 12 pages of rune spells of all shapes and sizes. Following rune magic, we move on to divine intervention. In times of desperation, initiates of a cult can call directly on their god for aid. These are massive feats that are not taken lightly. It also mentions that gods very rarely act beyond their sphere of influence. For example, a storm god is unlikely to bring someone back to life, and also they will very rarely intervene against their own followers. Also, they are bound to time in the mundane world, so cannot affect the passage of it directly. Attempting divine intervention means that the adventurer sacrifices a rune point permanently and asks the favour of their god. If the GM deems this acceptable, then they need to roll under their power on a D100. A roll above means their god is unmoved and nothing happens. A roll equal to or under the power means the god hears and answers their prayers. When this happens, the person asking for divine intervention loses rune points equal to the number rolled on the D100, and once they run out, they lose power permanently. If this drops them to 0, then they die and go to the afterlife to serve their god. It talks about using divine intervention for resurrection, with the caveat that only the god Humact will deny this, and also talks about NPC divine intervention. After this, we shift focus to the spirit world. This place is described as one of sublime beauty and life, but also where lost spirits wander, broken dreams coalesce, and nightmares feast. Different places are interconnected by spiritual pathways, and to most it appears as a grey sea of nothingness. For shamans, however, it looks different, a place of metaphoric environments and spectacular places. Shaman are experts in the use of spirit magic and are committed to its knowledge and that of the spirit world, having specialised abilities to harness this. They exist both in the mundane and spiritual world simultaneously, and their main responsibility is to tend to the spiritual knowledge and protection of their kinfolk. They act as keepers of ritual, enchanters and summoners. A shaman can leave their body and wander in the spirit world, though this costs magic points, and can sense spirits nearby, cult affiliations and rune affinities. They have a number of skills that they can use in the spirit world. Spirit Dance, which is used to avoid hostile spirits, Spirit Lore, which is knowledge of the spirits, and Spirit Travel, which is used to navigate the spirit world. It explains what a shaman's fetch is, as well as the powers that they have, travelling in the spirit world, and how to resolve spirit combat, covering how it's initiated, the damage done, how to attack spirits with weapons and spells, disengaging from spirit combat, and even possession. It talks about bound spirits, i.e. those that inhabit items or animals, and how they can be controlled, and it gives a very light touch on sorcery, where it goes into how the intensity of a spell can be increased using this esoteric knowledge, and then we have a selection of spot rules for a number of different situations. It gives rulings on aimed blows, chasers, which as we know are gobbledygook, dealing with darkness, defenceless or unaware opponents, disarming, drowning or asphyxiation, falling damage, fighting while prone, and fire. It has more combat rules, things such as grappling, helpless opponents, knockback, knockouts or stunning, mounted combat, and multiple actions are covered, and there are further rules on poison, shooting at moving targets, protected targets, and skills over 100%. There's also information on thrown or dropped objects and 2 weapon use. We also have a box out on encumbrance and movement penalties, which I'm choosing to ignore like most players do. Finally, in this book, we have a section on what happens between adventurers. It touches on ransom, ability checks, magic and rune points, and other improvements such as training, increasing reputation, and learning new spells, though most of this kind of thing is out of scope for this starter set. Okay, that completes Book 1. Moving on to Book 2, The World of Glorantha, it is worth mentioning that on my channel I've covered the mythology and history of the world, chapter and verse, and so at the risk of overly repeating myself, I'll try to just go over the basics of what is covered here without going into too much detail. The first thing it goes into is the fact that Glorantha is a world where magic is part of everyday life and the mythology is real. Allegiances are held to family, tribe, city and cult, and they make the important distinction that there are no alignments in RuneQuest. People have loyalties instead. Even though humans are the predominant species, there are a number of elder races such as elves, dwarfs, trolls and many others that rule their own part of the world. It is a Bronze Age setting where the theme is one of the relationship between gods and mortals. The gods are very real and play a hand in the world. There are gods for major things like the elements, the moon, the sun and the like, as well as for concepts such as truth, disorder, stasis and harmony, and for small things like cows, boats and campfires. As mentioned, it's a world where the primary metal is bronze, and it's one of city-states, tribes, kings, queens and other supreme authorities. Priest-kings are fairly normal in Glorantha, and most people here are polytheistic, recognising many gods. Temples are often the most powerful institutions wherever they are and offer training and skills, magic and knowledge, as well as being a second home for their members. People can and do move to different cults on occasion. It makes the distinction that Glorantha's Bronze Age setting, though having similarities to Earth, is very much a fantastical one, where the likes of the Moon Goddess has a colossal flying demon that can wipe out entire armies. The tallest mountain is 7 miles high. Dragons sleep and are so huge that they are mistaken for ranges of hills. There are talking ducks, baboons, sentient fish, and there's a race of beasts that herd men. And the landscape is dotted with ruins from previous ages and even places from god time. Bronze can be made from the bones of gods that died in the Gods' War, and other normal metals have magical properties here, with the most precious being iron that only dwarves know how to mine and manufacture, and that the elder races are vulnerable to. We have a box out that asks the question, what is Glorantha? Making the point that it is often considered the greatest fantasy setting of all time, and influenced the likes of Game of Thrones, The Elder Scrolls and Warcraft. It's not a setting of knights in armour, wizards and hobbits, but one of Bronze Age warriors who all have personal magic, enter the gods' realm, reenact myths and possibly change them, achieving apotheosis. It's a place of horrific chaos beasts, unknowable elder races, and one where myth itself can be interacted with. After this it talks about the runes. As previously mentioned, they are a key feature of the world and are cosmic archetypes that make up the universe. They conflict with each other and are manifested in the gods and infused in all and everything. The gods are associated with runes and often considered personifications of runic forces, though this remains largely a mystery, with even the gods themselves being cryptic about it, and the fact remains that they could indeed be beyond comprehension. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. They remain symbols of power that can only be unlocked by those who have trained extensively to do so, and as an adventurer's affinity increases, so does their power, until they can eventually become a rune master and use this power to play a part in the hero wars, whenever they may be. It then goes into the types of runes. Firstly, there are the elements, of which there are 6. Darkness, water, earth, fire/sky, air, and the grudgingly accepted moon. They're the power runes, which are harmony, disorder, stasis, movement, truth, illusion, fertility, and death. The form runes, which are beast, man, plant, dragon, newt, spirit, and chaos. And the condition runes, those being mastery, magic, infinity, luck, and fate. As mentioned previously, a central theme of the world of Glorantha is the interaction of mortals and gods, and the mythical and mundane. The gods have a powerful influence on the world, and polytheism is common, having a relationship with one deity while actively acknowledging and respecting the existence of others, and their lives often centre around this. Magic brings safety, terror, conflict and civility, and plays a decisive role in warfare. Priests can call down lightning, shamans can unleash spirits, and the Lunar Empire can release the horrific Crimson Bat upon transgressors. Having powerful magic on your side can turn the tide of battle. The gods and cults, as you may expect, play a key role in Gloranthan life. The cults are communities in themselves and incredibly important. Cult membership gives worshippers a fraction of a deity's divine spark that is manifested in rune magic, and most cults also teach the use of spirit magic to members in exchange for loyalty, worship and sacrifice. Additionally, cults have elite members known as rune masters, rune priests or god talkers. They have intense affinities with their gods, paired with great magical power, which attracts the attention of enemies of the god and creates more responsibility. It gives us a list of the important gods, including their runic affinities. There's Aldrya, the goddess of the forest and mother of elves, Arganagar, a trollish god of surface darkness and a leader to that race. We have Babista Gore, the avenging daughter, a goddess of bloodshed and reprisal, and Shalana Arroy, the beloved goddess of healing and one of the 7 Lightbringers. We have Dakafal, the father of mortals and judge of the dead, and Analda, the Earth Queen, who is the goddess of women, agriculture and fertility. There is Ermal, the god of deception, who is also one of the 7 Lightbringers, and this is followed by Humact, the god of death, war and endings. There is Isseres, the deity of merchants, travellers and speakers, and another Lightbringer, and then we have Kai Galito, the mother of trolls. We have Lancor Mai, the knowledge god and Lightbringer, and Magasta, the goddess of the seas and oceans. There's Marangor, the earth shaker, the goddess of destruction and sister of Babistagor, and Mostal, known as the Maker, the god of dwarves, and Orlanth, the storm god, leader of the Lightbringers and king of the gods. There is the Red Goddess, the daughter of the 7 Mothers, the goddess of the Red Moon, and patron of the Lunar Empire, and we have the 7 Mothers themselves, the primary pantheon of the Lunar Empire. There's Stormbull, the enemy of chaos and manifestation of fury, and Yelm, the sun god, and finally we have Yelmalio, the bright god, son of Yelm and patron of the Sundome Temple. It's interesting to note that Waha, the butcher god who taught the tribes of Prax how to survive, seems to have been accidentally left off, though he is in the main body of the text. Each of the gods is given a paragraph or 2 explaining who they are and what they're responsible for, where they're worshipped and their relationships to other gods. We have a box out that discovers the main elder races, which gives us a brief overview of the Aldryami or elves, dragon newts, Mostali or dwarves, merfolk, trolls or Uz, and we have our first mention of the foul brew, a species polluted by chaos. This may seem confusing to beginners, however, as you delve deeper into the richness of Gloranthan lore, this all makes wonderful sense. After this we have a section on the unique aspects of Glorantha. The first thing it touches upon is heroes and hero questing. Embarking on a hero quest means a mortal performing a magical act which allows them to interact directly with the mythology of Glorantha, a perilous act that has the ultimate aim of bringing some of that magic to the world of mortals. Failure brings ruin to all connected to the hero, and ultimately the role of the hero is to fight in the hero wars. Another aspect of Glorantha is that of kinship, affinities to runes and passions. I do have to make a point here that the idea that community, advancement, deadly combat and the passage of time as things that are unique to Glorantha is something I simply disagree with. There are many other games that have these themes. I think if they had said that these things were central to Glorantha, that would perhaps have been more fitting. It has a section on Glorantha money where it details the coinage of the world, that being silver lunas, gold wheels, copper clacks and a troll currency called bolgs. And this leads us to sex and marriage on Glorantha. Many religions celebrate sexuality. The fertility goddess Enalda has many lovers and husbands, and even Orlanth has a female aspect called Vinga. In Glorantha there are 4 sexes: female, male, neuter and both, and there are 6 genders: female, male, Yingen, Nandan, Hellering and none. In addition to this, unmarried sex is usually fine regardless of any of the above, though marriage oaths are incredibly significant as it is sanctified by divine oath. Next we move on to the world itself. The world of Glorantha is not a globe, but flat and roughly shaped like the Earth Rune, floating upon Sramak River. It is encircled by the primeval ocean. The air realm between the earth and sky is where the air gods dwell, and underneath Glorantha is the underworld. The sky is an off-centre bowl that rotates about the pole star, the only stable point in the celestial dome. Above the sky is the sky world, and the stars are places where the magical denizens of this place peer through to guard their followers. The underworld is populated by immortal creatures, evil dreams, and the souls of the dead and neverborn. There are lands of incredibly powerful supernatural races beyond the middle world, and they occasionally journey to the lands of men. There is a sea of fire and the lands of dawn and dusk. Only those heroes destined to fight in the hero wars can travel to these places, and from there to the realm of the gods themselves. It tells us about Dragon Pass and the homelands within, such as Sartar, Esrolia, the Grasslands, Prax and Lunatarsh, and mentions other principalities such as Dagorian Karth and Dragon's Eye. This is followed by a fairly detailed map of the region, and then we move on to myth and history. It tells us about the god time and the Golden Age and the birth of Umath, the primal heir, and the gods' war when Orlanth slew the sun god Yelm with the sword Death, plunging the world into darkness. It mentions the birth of the unholy trio, Ragnaglar the mad god, Thed the mother of the brew, and Malia the mistress of disease, and how they let chaos loose upon the world. It talks about the quest of the seven Lightbringers, Orlanth, Shalana Arroy, Ermal, Isseries, Lankormai, Fleshman, and the mysterious Ginna Jar, who travelled into the underworld to bring Yelm back to the surface, a quest that they succeeded in, which brought light back to the world and banished the darkness. It goes into the beginning of history, the Great Compromise, and the beginning of time itself. We have mention of the Dawn Ages and the First Council, and the arrogance of the Second Council, who formulated a method to birth a new god. The experiment ended in the birth of Gabaji, a chaos god who kept Glorantha fighting itself for 50 years. This ended the Dawn Ages. The Empire of the Worm's friends followed, and this led to the Third Council, which saw the Dragonutes rise against them in 1042 and slaying them all. It covers the Dragon Kill War and moves on to the Empire of the Red Moon, whereby 7 desperate hero questers conspired to resurrect the goddess that had been killed in the Great Darkness, the Red Moon. They quested deep into the underworld and reformed her. She contained all the dichotomies of the universe. Her arrival in time changed the land. The Red Goddess ascended to the heavens as the Red Moon, leaving her ever-reincarnating son, the Red Emperor, to rule over her lands. With his help, the Lunar Empire eventually conquered Sartar in 1602. In 1613, however, Starbrow's rebellion overthrew the Lunar occupation, and the Lunar Empire made other plans by extending the Glow Line, a marker of the Red Goddess's power, by building the Temple of the Reaching Moon in the Storm Mountains with the idea that it would finally vanquish Orlanth. A lunar victory looked on the cards until the Sartarites summoned a true dragon underneath the completed temple that devoured half of the lunar army in Dragon Pass. This was known as the Dragon Rise and is excellently pictured on the front cover to this book. Shortly after the Dragon Rise, Kalia Starbrow led the liberation of Boldholm and proclaimed herself Prince of Sartar. The adventurers start in this long prophesied period known as the Hero Wars, which is said to culminate around Dragon Pass with the gathering of great heroes. As I explained earlier, I've done many videos on the history of Glorantha where I go into far more depth, so don't forget to check them out. The next section is a part that I believe is destined to be beloved by new and old gamers alike, the city of Johnstown. The city itself is a settlement in Dragon Pass and a safe haven from danger and a crossroads of adventure. It goes into the history of the settlement, which includes a timeline of relevant events from the last 100 or so years. It details northern Sartar and the local tribes, and has a small map of which tribe claims which land as their own. It then gives a breakdown of the city itself, as well as a really nicely done map. It talks about the population here, as well as the religions, the walls, gates and towers, the housing situation, the public baths, and the food available here, even breaking down the distribution of grain, meat and fish. It has a nice box out which covers the cost of living, and then goes into the city politics. It discusses the citizenship, the government, the guard and the militia, the guilds, free sages, thieves of Johnstown, and even lunars that still live there. After this, it stats out the powerful people of Johnstown, including Ongerin Holdfast, the city rex of Johnstown, Joriera Latish, the city administrator, Sister Erin Mercy, the high priestess of Shalana Arroy, Jo Myth, the high priestess of Isares, and 3 wealthy brothers, Darvast Hornos, Lyserian Goodspeech, and Darningle Hornos, and the chief librarian and high priest of the Temple of Lankormai, Garangian Bronzeguts, as well as a number of other priests including Mata Min, a priestess of the god of knowledge who wears the false ceremonial beard associated with people of that position. It also details other various people of importance such as Bardrenor Redcow, Golanth the Exile and Harshax Elkenvale. We have Yarina the Short, the master of the Baker's Guild, and Sarastip Prince-Killer, a sword lord of Humact. It also gives us Enel Silva, the high priestess of Enalda, and Karang Jester, the local priest of Ermal, the trickster god. After this we go into the city quarters. It gives descriptions of various buildings such as apartments, common residences, inns, taverns, shops and temples, as well as tenements, warehouses and wealthy residences. We have a really good box out called Going Shopping, where it details common things that you can buy, as well as the price and what you typically get for your money. It then goes into a bit more detail, starting with the upper city. There is a map and it covers every important place here, be that the various temples and a non-dedicated shrine that can be rented that is a generic place of worship. We have another box out called Healing for Hire, where it gives us details on the price and effectiveness of the healing available in Johnstown, and then we eventually move on to the Scholars Quarter. We have a lot of detail on the Temple of Lankormai, and it even covers a contraption called Ionastaran's Catalogue Wheel. Various other temples and taverns are detailed, and then it moves on to the Merchant Quarter, a place with numerous inns, warehouses and markets. Finally, it details the Crafter's Quarter, which has a number of inns and Yarina's bakery. The next part is called the People of Johnstown. Here it gives us stats for a typical resident, a citizen, city guard, militiaman, merchant, free sage, thief, and lunar resident. The last section covers the area outside of Johnstown, which includes the famous Apple Lane and the Rainbow Mounds. Now we come on to Book 3, Solo Quest. I'm not going to go through this as I don't want to spoil it for anyone watching. However, it is a particularly well done scenario done in the choose your own adventure style, where you take on the role of Asana, daughter of Farnan, that covers the Battle of Dangerford. Chaosium has done an online version of this that you can use instead of reading the book, which is really nicely done. I'll link it below. It's definitely worth a shot, and of course it's free. Book 4, Adventures, has the highest page count in the set, and although I'm not going to spoil it here, suffice to say that the Rainbow Mounds are visited at some point, as we already know due to being player-facing and GM-facing maps. And the whole thing is really well thought out as a way of introducing players to the different factions and creatures of the setting. If ever there was a role-playing game that would reap huge benefits from a starter set, RuneQuest is that game. The main issues people have with some role-playing games is that of slightly too crunchy rules or too dense a setting, and unfortunately RuneQuest is burdened with both of these things to some degree. As a game that has been constantly developed over the course of 50 plus years, it has a deep and interesting mythology that can often even confuse veterans of the game at times. And even though RuneQuest was the first game I ever played over 35 years ago, things like strike rank still give me a pause for thought to this day. When you add the extra layer of runic affinities and passions on top of everything else, some, myself included, think it's perhaps a step too far in terms of ease of use. The starter set sets out to explain the rules in the easiest terms possible, and if I'm honest, there were some rules that actually finally clicked into place in my mind after reading them. In this sense, they've done a great job. Also, I think leaving out sorcery, condition runes, and only giving shamans a light touch was the right decision, as I know a number of long-term players that still can't wrap their heads around sorcery, and also continue to view shamans as a bit too esoteric to consider looking into. In addition to this, while some may consider the omission of character creation to be a misstep, I completely agree, as it just complicates things further than they need to be for beginners. The section on the gods is good but brief, and I think they probably should have detailed some of the chaos deities. Having a Krosh kit on the cover without going into what Krosh is seems a bit of an oversight. Magic seems to be a bit unevenly covered, as spirit magic is given far less page space than rune magic, despite being far more common, and I think narrowing the amount of pages dedicated to rune magic spells into a few pages of tables like spirit magic would have not only made the book leaner, but also given a greater degree of consistency. Book 2 surprised me the most. I fully expected page after page of dense Gloranthan prehistory, but instead I discovered that it just touched lightly upon the major events since God time, and put more of a focus on something that players old and new will actually use in-game, Johnstown, a decision that should be applauded. The book is not left wanting for the non-inclusion of things like Nysalor, Arcat, the Raising of Doristor, the Quest of the Red Goddess, the Crimson Bat and the like, and they will hopefully be slowly revealed and given more focus in upcoming products for new players to delve into. For older players, most of them already know this material, and well, if you haven't got a copy of the Guide to Glorantha, can name the Lightbringers as easily as the Beatles, or understand how illumination works, then can you really call yourself a Gloranthophile? The solo quest is all the more impressive with the knowledge that it was a late addition to the set, and the final book being a piece of work that shows off lots of great things about Glorantha in a way that players old and new can easily grasp gets a definite thumbs up from me. Another thing to mention is the art. I have been perhaps overcritical in the past of some of the 90s RuneQuest products. You know who you are. However, the art in this is absolutely first class, and no less than a game of RuneQuest's pedigree deserves. From full-colour spreads to sketched headshots of important NPCs to large-scale city maps to pieces that look almost like stained glass windows, it just oozes class, quality and care throughout. There are, however, a few issues. The first is the same gripe I had with the Call of Cthulhu starter set. It's just too tall to fit on my shelves, and I fear it may need to be relegated to the top of some bookshelf somewhere. The second is the build quality of Book 1. As the main rulebook, this is no doubt going to be the one that is flicked through and referenced the most. However, it's just that bit too flimsy to be able to withstand that kind of regular usage. Even reading it for this review made it look worn. I think giving just this book a stiff card cover would have improved the longevity of the set, and I'm genuinely hoping that it wasn't a cynical, planned obsolescence in order to encourage you to buy the hardback rules book. Other than that, I think it's tremendous value for money at around £25 or $30 in print, for new players wanting to know what the older Glorantha files are talking about, and for the older players wanting the new scenario and Johnstown material, and maybe for gamers that grew apart from RuneQuest and fancy rediscovering its wonders. Personally, I just wish this had been around when I started playing RuneQuest over 35 years ago. I think the authors have accomplished pretty much everything they hoped to in the beginning, and everybody wins here, which means ultimately RuneQuest wins, a win that has been a long time in the pipeline. I give it a 9.5 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Also, if you're interested in buying this product, I'll put some links below. Lastly, if you like what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon or even becoming a member of my YouTube channel. Bud out.